Today's lesson is on whether to sell or process further. Some processes create multiple products. For instance, if you churn raw milk, you're going to get butter and regular milk and skim milk at the end of the process, but you can't get those three things until the process is over. So items created during a process that are not separable until the process is over are separable at the split off point. That's the point at which the process is ended and the new things come about from the original ingredient. Some products and byproducts are usually things that have to be thrown away or have a very minor residual value. Some products and byproducts that come from processes are sellable at the split off. So as soon as the process is over, you have a product that has a market. But others are only sellable if they're processed further, if something more is made. And some products you have a choice. Sell them at split off or process them further. So the decision we're going to work on today is when you have a joint process and products come about because of a process, should you sell them at split off or discard them or process them further? So we're going to practice that particular decision. The cost of the joint process is never helpful in this decision about whether to process further. Why? Well, the cost of creating the products is sunk. It's already done. By the time you have those products, the joint cost has already been expended because there's no way to get those products until you finish the process. You can't get the butter until you churn the raw milk. So the cost of the raw milk or the cost of the churning is not helpful in understanding whether you should process the result of the process further. So the joint process costs are irrelevant. So ignore them in the story for this particular decision. The strategy for deciding whether you should process a product further or sell it at split off is to analyze the incremental revenue and incremental cost of processing and compare that to what you would get if you didn't process. So let's work through an example together. So Elsie Dairy Products churns full cream milk into butter and buttermilk. Okay, so the process is the churning, and when they're done with the process, they have two products, butter and buttermilk. Elsie bought 12,000 gallons of milk for $18,000 and spent $3,000 on the churning process to make milk into butter and buttermilk. That is the joint cost, and it doesn't help us to, that joint cost won't give us any idea whether to continue to process the butter or the buttermilk into some new product, ice cream or whatever. They go on then to tell you that butter could be sold immediately at $2 a pound. So it's at split off. As soon as the process is complete, you can sell the butter for $2.20 a pound. And the buttermilk can be sold for $1.20 a quart. Okay. Here's the decision. Elsie can process the butter further into honey butter by mixing it with honey and incurring an additional cost of $1.10 per pound. The honey butter sells for a little bit more than the plain butter. Okay. Market conditions are good and she can sell either one. Okay, so should she process it further into honey butter? That's the question. So that first piece about the cost of the process is not helpful in knowing whether you should take the butter to the next stage. And the buttermilk, selling it split off, is not interesting because it doesn't have another option. It's just sold. But the butter can either be sold at the $2.20, which has been bolded, or you can process it further into honey butter and sell it at a higher price. So we're going to compare the $2.20 that you can get right now to the possibility of what you could get by turning it into honey butter. Well, if you turn it into honey butter, you can get $2.30, but it's going to cost you $1.10 in honey to do it. So the profit per pound is only going to be $1.20. So that's worse than just selling it as straight butter. So they shouldn't process the butter further, because the shift in sales price is 10 cents and it would cost them $1.10 to get that new price. So it does not justify it. So the honey butter, if there was a shift in the market and all of a sudden honey butter was hot and you could sell it for $5 a pound, things would be different. But at this particular price, it's not attractive. Let's try another one. You can freeze the frame and see if you can work this, and then rejoin and walk through it with us and see how you did. So two products, LB and NH, emerged from a joint process that cost $44,000 to complete. A total of 2,000 units of LB are produced from the joint process, and they can be sold at the split off for $13,000, or they can be processed further, costing $11,000, but then they can be sold for $19. Okay, should they process LB further? So that first sentence is about the joint cost, which is not relevant. It's got to be expended no matter what, whether you process or you don't process, and that's the definition of an irrelevant cost, is it doesn't change between alternatives. So we're going to gray that out and ignore it. So here we have 2,000 units of LB. We can either get $13 for it, or we can spend $11,000 and get $19 for it. So what should we do? Should we process it further? So we could immediately get $26,000 if we didn't process it further, the 2,000 times the $13. Or we could get $38,000 for it, but we would have to add $11,000 in cost. So the incremental profit would be $27,000. So that is better than the $26,000. So in this case, LB should be processed further because the shift in the sales price does justify adding the $11,000 in cost. So if this didn't sink in on the first time, you might want to go and read this section of your chapter, work some homework, and then come back and listen to it again, and it might be absorbed at a deeper level.